What is above is like what is below, and what is below is like that which is above, to make the miracle of the one thing. Steele R. and Singer D.W., 1928. The Emerald Table, Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine.
I wouldn't hold a weekend like this simply to go over a body of ancient literature if I didn't think it had some efficacy or import for the modern dilemma. And some of you may know the song by the Grateful Dead, in which the refrain is, "We need a miracle every day." I think any reasonable person can conclude that the redemption of the world, if it's to be achieved, can only be achieved through magic. It's too late for science. It's too late for hortatory politics. And let's talk for a moment about Mercury, because the spirit Mercurius is almost the patron deity of alchemy. You all know what Mercury looks like. It's at room temperature, a silvery liquid that flows. It's like a mirror. For the alchemists, and this is just a very short exercise in alchemical thinking, for the alchemists, Mercury was mind itself, in a sense. And by tracing through the steps by which they reached that conclusion, you can have a taste of what alchemical thinking was about. Mercury takes the form of its container. If I pour mercury into a cup, it takes the shape of the cup. If I pour it into a test tube, it takes the shape of a test tube. This taking the shape of its container is a quality of mind. And yet here it is present in a flowing silvery metal. The other thing is, Mercury is a reflecting surface. You never see Mercury. What you see is the world that surrounds it, which is perfectly reflected in its surface, like a moving mirror, you see. Now, the other Hermetic perception that is well illustrated by just thinking for a moment about Mercury is the notion, and this is central to all Hermetic thinking, of the microcosm and the macrocosm. That somehow the great world, the whole of the cosmos, is reflected in the mystery of man, meaning men and women. It's reflected in the mystery of the human mind-body interface. So for an alchemist, it makes perfect sense to extrapolate from these internal, what we call internal psychological processes, to external processes in the world. That distinction doesn't exist for the alchemist. Okay, now another point that was brought up was, in going around the circle, was the externalization of the soul. And what we're trying to do is, in this weekend, is study and talk about the idea of redeeming the world through magic. And how is this to be done? Well, the Philosopher's Stone is a complex of ideas that no matter how you divide it, no matter how you slice it, it's very difficult to hold the pith essence of this concept. But what it really comes down to is the idea that spirit is somehow resident in matter in a very diffuse form, and that the goal of Hermetic thinking and later alchemy is the concentration and redemption of this spirit, a focusing of it, a bringing of it together. This is an idea that was common in the Hellenistic world, not only to Hermetic thinking, but also to Gnosticism. Gnosticism is the idea that somehow the pure, holy, real light of being was scattered through a universe of darkness and of saturnine power, and that the goal is, by a process which we can call yogic or alchemical or meditative or moral/ethical, the light must be gathered and concentrated in the body and then somehow released and redeemed. And all esoteric traditions, East and West, talk about the creation of this body of light. And we will not in this weekend talk very much about alchemy, non-Western alchemy, Taoist alchemy, and Vedic alchemy. But in those systems too, the notion is about the creation of this vehicle of light. This is one metaphor for the externalization of the soul. The Philosopher's Stone is another. And I will challenge you to try to imagine what the achievement of the Philosopher's Stone would be like, because it's in trying to think that way that you begin to dissolve the categories of the Cartesian trap. And so imagine for a moment an object, a material, which can literally do anything. It can move across categorical boundaries with no difficulty whatsoever. So what do I mean? I mean that if you possessed the Philosopher's Stone and you were hungry, you could eat it. If you needed to go somewhere, you could spread it out and sit on it, and it would take you there. If you needed a piece of information, it would become the equivalent of a computer screen, and it would tell you things. If you needed a companion, it would talk to you. In other words, if you needed to take a shower, you would hold it over your head and water would pour out of it. Now you see, this is an impossibility. That's right. It's a coincidentia positorum. It is something which behaves like imagination and matter without ever doing damage to the ontological status of one or the other. But it is now once again exhausted, and our cultural crisis is much greater. It is global, it is total, it involves every man, woman, and child on this planet. Every bug, bird, and tree is caught up in the cultural crisis that we have engendered. Our ideas are exhausted, the ideas that we inherit out of Christianity and its half-brother science, or its bastard child science. So what I'm suggesting is that an archaic revival needs to take place. And it seems to be well in hand in the form of the revival of goddess worship and shamanism and partnership. But notice that these things are old, 10,000 years or more old. But there was an unbroken thread that, however thinly drawn, persists right up to the present. So the idea of this weekend is to show the way back to the high magic of the late Paleolithic, to show that there were intellectual traditions, there were minority points of view that kept the faith, that never allowed it to die. And to my mind, this alchemical, Hermetic, Gnostic, Egyptian, Chaldean thread is the thread. And if we, unravel it with sufficient care and attention, then we can build a bridge from the otherwise nearly incomprehensible high magic of the late Paleolithic. We can get it as near to ourselves as John Dee, who died in 1604. We can discover that it's no further away from us than the beginning of the 30 Years' War. And, for my money, after that, it gets pretty mucked up. I mean, after Eliphas Levi, who's already waffling, I'm not very interested in the occultism of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. But it's not necessary, because scholarship gives us the Chaldean oracles, the Trismegistic hymns, the library at Nag Hammadi, and so forth and so on. So my impulse is to, in the most austere sense, repopularize, reintroduce this kind of thinking so that people can live it out. And then, step by step, we can evolve our language and evolve our understanding to make our way back to the garden, back to Eden. It's occurred to me recently, it's said that Christ opened the doors to paradise. Yes, but he closed the doors to Eden. And paradise is a very airy place where everybody sits around on clouds strumming their lyres. I think what we want to do is make our way back to the alchemical garden. That's where our roots are. That's where meaning is. Meaning lies in the confrontation of contradiction, the coincidentia oppositorum.